What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sunday night. Welcome to the pilot episode of Preacher on AMC. I'm so excited to talk about this. This is my favorite comic book of all time. I'm here with three awesome co-hosts to break down the first episode. Stick with us, guys. We'll see you in just 1 second.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
We tried.
So melancholy.
Oh, yeah.
I want to get juiced.
Welcome to the Preacher.
Yeah, we could all talk in our Texas accents or something.
No,
That's not really good at all. That was bad.
I got a really good one.
Welcome to the show, guys. Welcome to Sunday night. Welcome to the pilot episode of Preacher AFTERBUZZ TV recap after show. I'm your host, Ben Bateman, joined by three wonderful co-hosts. I've never been on an after show panel with any of you before.
Oh, welcome.
Even one. You guys are like old pros together, though, right?
Oh, yeah. We've been on geek shows before together. Comic book shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Dave, by the way. I'm Dave Child. You can find me at Mr. Dave Child on the internet.
Mr. Dave
In general,
Child. If you will.
Mr. Dave Child.
Guys, I'm Roxy Striar. You can find me everywhere at Roxy Striar, and I'm so excited to be covering another DC show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm Frank Moran. You can follow me on Twitter at HappyGoJackie.
Sweet.
I still don't get it. I still don't get
Don't
it.
worry.
Do you want to
Just
explain it for the new
accept it.
fans? Or no?
it's a terrible, it's a boring story, but I'm never going to give it up. I can't. I'm too far committed to
I
this
get
tweet.
I'm Ben Bateman. You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter or Instagram. Let's get into the episode. And before we do, I should remind everybody that, of course, we're on iTunes. Leave your comments on YouTube. We provide free content here at AfterBuzz, and we would like to continue to provide free content. So if you guys give us like a rating and review, helps us stay high in the standings, so we can just keep the lights on. It's important to have
5-star
the lights on. Yeah,
5-star us.
yeah.
Do it.
Just
all the way.
That's what we're really asking
Share
for.
it. Tell your grandma about us.
I was beating around the bush. I was asking you to use your opinion, but 5 stars is really what we want. So just give us that.
Just do
would
it.
be helpful.
Before you even listen, this is the first show. You don't know what it's like. Just 5 stars already before you listen.
Or thumbs up, depending on where
Thumbs
you
up.
are.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Thumbs up is sweet too. And leave your thoughts in the comments on YouTube. So let's get into the episode, guys. We start out with an incredible power coming down from the sky and blowing people up. This crazy scene in an African church.
Yeah. First, it seems to go through Plan 9 from outer space, or maybe the opening to MST3K.
Yeah.
Right.
Like in space, which I thought was great.
When it opens and it's like fun, because it opens like fairly abruptly. I was like, is this a commercial? Is this like a logo? Is the episode starting yet?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I felt the same way when they released this scene a couple of days ago, and I was checking it out, and I was like, I wonder if they're going to play that during the actual show before we get there, and then it's like Africa. I'm like, oh, we must just start with Africa, but we didn't.
Right.
So yeah, that was interesting.
No, what I liked about it is it felt like, for those of you that read the comic book series, it just felt like you were kind of opening up and get a chance of what you saw, like a prequel to what you saw in the comic. And I love the way I thought from that moment you're seeing that we're going to pay homage to the source material, but we're also going to tweak it and tweak it slightly along the way.
So that reminds me, I wanted to point something out really quickly, guys. Preacher stopped being published, I think, in 2001 or 2002. The story has been done for 14 years. We have all read the comic, and we will talk about that, but we're going to try to really focus on just the show as we're watching it, because there's obviously a lot of stuff that this alludes to that is already out there, and unlike shows like Walking Dead or other ones where the comic continues to be written as you go, everything is out there. So if you wanted it at any point in time in the last 15 years, you would know. And if you still want to, we encourage you to read the comic because it's amazing, but we will have like a spoilery sort of talking about the comic book section at the end of the episode. After predictions, we'll have like our spoiler predictions.
We want to talk to the geeks that are like us, but also the people that aren't as geeky as us.
So we will try to not spoil or ruin anything.
We have a really good combination of people in the chat right now, coming from both worlds. So
sweet.
Yeah, excited to have you guys here.
Yeah.
Sticking with this crazy spirit that we see, and we see, a crazy spirit pop up a few times in the episode. They definitely kind of, like, I didn't see the explosion of and I guess I did because sort of, but it's weird that the guy blew up. I didn't see that coming. Did you guys?
Well, I didn't see it going into another preacher.
That's
at
what
all.
I'm saying. Yeah.
That's like the fact that we visit not who the preacher is in the show. That it's not Jesse Custer is the first thing that the spirit enters really surprised me.
Yeah.
Just in general, because it's about preacher. You think it would be about a specific preacher, but we go through all these kind of preachers in the background.
I was looking as people were live tweeting the show, and everybody was like, "Oh, that's interesting. This is the preacher." And and then he blows up, and people are like, "How does the main character blow up within the first few minutes?" And I was like, "Oh, wow, yeah, that's now it's happening."
Hard for me to imagine anybody having seen this show without having seen at least one ad for it first. They've been promoting it so hard that
That's true.
How could you really think that guy was the preacher? You don't even see him in the ads, not even once.
Well, maybe it's preacher versus preacher.
Sure, right.
Like, this is one preacher, but we follow the hero preacher as he fights that preacher.
Right.
That
Well,
would be,
because it was also
yeah.
you wonder like maybe it's something that's happening like maybe decades sooner. You're seeing
Yeah.
and you're seeing maybe something that's kind of passed along as people die or something like that. So maybe you're seeing that. That's what I thought at first, maybe, and then you realize nope, it's
Right.
still happening present day.
Well, what's cool about that though is that so this does take place time-wise before the comic even starts. Like, so this is what we're watching as far as like that scene could very well exist. It was just never written. So
Right.
they decided to start a little earlier than the book, which is cool because as obviously as fans, like we're watching this being, I don't know what's going to happen. I suppose that could have happened. That character maybe did exist in the world before Jesse Custer gets the spirit.
I feel like it was a wow way to start the episode. I don't know how much it's going to be referenced at any point again, but I do think it got people's attention, which is what they were probably trying to go for.
Yeah, and I think there's also a thematic thing going on with the preachers we see that can't contain the spirit they seem like devoted preachers
Right.
in a way. They're devoted to their own religion. Like, we only see the guy from Africa
Yep.
who immediately thinks he's a prophet
Yep.
as soon as he gets hit by it. And we see later on someone that works in the Church of Satan
Right.
gets blown up. We don't get to meet them. But then we also get Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise killed me,
Yes.
destroyed me. If anybody knows or watches anything I do, you all know that
Right.
Tom Cruise is like my favorite person ever. I was destroyed. I was like, I'm never going to see Tom Cruise in the preacher world.
I'm so sorry.
I think we're taking that kind of lightly, though, about the Tom Cruise. They really have made a point about picking Tom Cruise. Apparently, this was like a massive
Yes.
selection process.
Right.
And THR wrote up an entire article that you guys should check out about what
Right.
it means that Tom Cruise is dead and why we've done this. But it's just like outrageous to me that wasn't just something in the writer's room that was like, who should we pick? Yeah, Tom Cruise. Let's get rid of him.
That's totally what I was thinking.
No, this they thought long and hard about this, and they were like, okay, we're killing him. Tom Cruise
Right.
got to go.
Yeah, to me, I thought it was like, I haven't read that article, but I thought it was someone who's devoted in a certain faith and is known for preaching about it in public, but is really firm in that faith.
Because they talk about him being a Scientologist being part of the reason, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think what happens when it finally lands in Jesse, I think it's important that it's in someone whose faith is shaky, whose faith is kind of not quite there.
Right, because when we're in Africa, what he says is, I am the prophet, I am the chosen one. Immediately, like, this is what's going on.
Right.
It's very hard to recognize in Jesse what it is that's taking place, so I think that's why that it sticks in him.
Right,
So,
yeah.
so now when the same spirit that eventually does find Jesse later in the episode in the church after he's prayed to a god that apparently isn't there, it's like they sell it, it's like this sort of like abyss sort of windy looking thing, but then you hear like a baby crying.
Yeah, you hear a baby crying. I mean, in the comics, this isn't a spoiler because we're at this point. You see a baby faith.
Yeah, the baby face
Baby
is
face.
on the spirit.
But instead of doing that in the show, it has the laugh of a baby and also the heartbeat that sounds like a baby through an ultrasound.
Yeah, it
like
was
when
an
you listen
interesting
to
choice.
a baby to a womb, it was beating like that, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice little like.
Yeah.
I know. I listen to womb babies all the time.
I get that, right.
Just
my
in your
favorite.
free time.
Yeah. I have a whole playlist of different babies and wombs.
Well, and interesting to think the way that it approaches Jesse. We only see him actually approach the priest in Africa before then, but even though we've seen what happened to Tom Cruise and the person in Russia. But you see this one, it seems more like cautiously kind of sizing up Jesse before it finally enters him.
Totally. Yeah, it creeps towards him. And they also show like the floor is warping and the chairs are moving. It's like this very powerful being. But yeah, so it enters Jesse Custer and he passes out. There's nothing. I mean, we don't see what happens till 3 days later, though.
Yeah. So it spends some time like gestating. it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Kind of as like a. And he also wasn't preaching in front of people, which was surprising to me.
Yeah,
That he
agreed.
didn't choose Jesse during a time where he's in front of people and preaching.
But he does choose him during a time where he's questioning.
Yes.
Which
Which
I
I
think
think
is-
is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a little confused on whether they found him after 3 days or whether they had found him immediately and just let him sleep for 3 days. They said he had a fever, but at what point? I mean, there's just no way that I bring somebody home and for 3 days with a fever, let them just be completely knocked out.
Well, so Cassidy finds him in the church. They say.
Right.
So apparently Cassidy gets out of jail, and he goes looking for him. and probably I would
And
assume
moves
finds
into
him.
the church. He moves into the attic of the church.
Yeah, and he finds him fairly quickly because he's probably looking for somewhere that is fairly deserted because he has to get out of the sun because he's a vampire. Speaking of which, let's jump into that scene, that airplane scene. Which he's like the fan favorite and like has been the fan favorite during casting. Like everybody talks about, they just nailed it. He really does feel just like Cassidy. And honestly, I did the premiere 2 weeks ago. In person, he is just like Cassidy. He sounds just like him.
Right.
He's the life of the party. Like he just goes for it. He's awesome. It's very accurate, I think.
Well, I knew him from Misfits when he was playing a character very similar to Cassidy, because it's someone who's kind of stumbling through life, is kind of has this punk attitude towards like
Rudy's
authority.
name, right?
Yeah. So it's nice to see. As soon as I heard he was casted for Cass, I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Yeah.
I was surprised he's not wearing sunglasses all of the time.
Right.
Because that's in the comics, but that's okay. I can accept it.
He says in the interview, he's like, my first inclination was to rip off Rudy. Can't do that. That's lazy. Had to reapproach it. It's kind of like Rudy, but it's not all the way the same character now.
That's perfect.
I think that probably was something that his agent put it into his contracts. Like, I'm not going to have my actor be on screen for every single episode in sunglasses and nobody be able to recognize who he is. So we're going to cut that part.
Right. I mean, it's probably also difficult for directing wise and even acting wise. You act a lot with your eyes.
Right.
So it's good to see that.
Yeah, and there's a reason obviously that we find out later we can talk about, but it's not here. So. But anyway, that scene is awesome. He's up there and he's entertaining these folks, these like vampire hunter, some sort of thing, whatever they are, and he's been hired, I guess.
Well, I guess because he doesn't know they're vampire hunters until he goes into the restroom, right? And then he finds that Bible and he goes like, "Oh, wait, these guys are actually out to get me."
Yeah.
And that's when he goes. That's when he turns the tables on him and starts kicking some butt.
Right. So it's like a private jet, and he's been hired as like a steward.
Yeah,
it
seems
like
like
a
it.
steward.
Yeah.
He's just probably picking up a bunch of odd jobs.
Yeah, right.
And this is one of them. This was probably my favorite scene in the entire episode because I felt like it really understood its tone and made people be like, oh, this show is like this. It's kind of funny. It's kind of quirky. It's got action. It's got all of these things, and it's got characters that we don't fully understand. So I really enjoyed that they put this in. I actually think the pilot would have been incomplete without it.
Yeah.
I thought he did the most amazing job, and in that moment where he does turn and he finds the defaced Bible and he's like, okay, time to kick it into high gear.
Right.
It was like that. Yes, let's go.
But he finds the Bible and he smirks, he smiles because he knows exactly what's coming.
Right.
And with the holy water even, he's just like, you guys are idiots.
Yeah.
He's like, this is not good. Yeah, but he's like, this is great. Now I can kill these guys, I can eat somebody. Because that's kind of his thing, right? Is he's only willing to feed on you if like he feels like you're a piece of crap. He's not going to just kill anybody.
When they pour that over his head, tears started. That was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's
that
great.
Was good. The best part was the bottle though.
Yeah, for sure.
When he like impales the guy with the bottle.
And then drains it,
and then just tips him out to pour it out.
I want that in my room, but like a statue of it, so I'm not actually killing somebody, but a person with that in it.
With
I
a
can
corpse
just pour-
filled with
but with
wine.
whiskey, not blood.
And also not with blood, although, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, preferably whiskey for me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why I shared that with you guys. Oh my God, Frank, take it away.
I don't know why you're so forgiving of like someone with a lot of blood in their room that just drinks it all the time. Whatever floats your boat.
To each their own.
I think you're being a little PC here. I don't know that you need to be that PC. But
I don't think I am, People like different things. I cover a lot of vampire shows, okay? Frank, go.
What I like about all three characters, though, but is that I just feel like they really tweaked and enhanced their backstories from what we know in the comics, and they open up so many other possibilities for storylines and places that even as comic book readers you don't know exactly where we're going, which is exciting.
Yeah, well, and also the weapons that they all had on board, they were like so sweet. They're like, like anti-vampire weapons. He has like the giant axe and the crossbow. It's not like just like it's like they don't just have like a bazooka or like a rifle or something like that.
Yeah,
a bunch of like medieval looking weapons.
Yeah, he didn't just sneak the spear in through security.
yeah.
That's kind of hard to just go through the X-ray machine and
just the way that he exits out of the plane too. Just like it's like, all right, even that fire up, knowing that he's a vampire, knowing that he could handle like a crash like that, but still.
And grabbing the umbrella.
Yeah.
That was perfect. That's pitch perfect to the comic, but also to just the sense of humor of the show.
Totally.
I love the umbrella.
They definitely got the sense of humor. I would say the casting of the main three characters and the humor, those are the two things that stuck out to me as like, this is where you guys really nailed it. As far as the as far as like the actual plot, the setup and everything, how they've changed it a little bit, I mean, that remains to be seen. There's a lot of show we still have to see.
Yeah.
But those three things, Cassidy, Jesse, and Tulip, who they changed a little bit, they all feel great. I think they all did a great job.
Yeah, and even the moments that in my mind, I was like, okay, I could go without this. I knew they were right. Like the intestines being all over the frickin' place when he lands.
Good.
And I was like, ew, why are they doing this? I know exactly why they're doing this. This is perfect.
Yeah.
But like, I hated it, but I loved it too.
Yeah, the comic is so grotesquely violent. I had forgotten, rereading it just recently, there's just so much blood.
Yeah, and there's plenty of parts in this pilot where they pull their punches.
Of course, right.
When it comes to violence. Like there's that fight in the bar, which we'll talk more about later. But when someone's arm breaks, you could see they had to negotiate with the TV censors just to make sure they can show what they wanted to show. Because you just see a little bit of bone, a little bit out of focus in the corner.
Just a little bit.
And not like a close-up horror show like you would see in the comics.
So I can't wait to talk about that scene, because that scene and the airplane are my two favorites. Right. But I do want to make sure we cover the townsfolk, because we do meet all these colorful characters.
Yeah.
And Cassidy arrives in Anvil, and that's where presumably season 1 is going to take place. I think at least somewhat in Anvil. We don't get much Anvil in the comic actually. No. It's almost not at all. So it's interesting that they decided to do that. But I think I understand why. Because so you have Sheriff Root and his son Eugene, also known Actually, I guess we don't know.
I think you can say he's Arseface.
Okay.
I think I'm going to go ahead and just say that, because I think it's kind of a known thing, and he has a face that looks like...
So I love both of those characters.
Like a what?
Like an arse.
Like an arse.
I love both of those characters. Those are directly out of the comic. They show up in the first book, so it's fitting that they're here. That prosthetic is ridiculous. It's so that's one of the most horrifying things on television I've actually seen. And it's he told me it's a full prosthetic, rubber, stretches across his chin, and the 2.5 hours of makeup every morning. There's no CGI. It's straight up real.
It looks awesome.
Oh, go ahead.
I was really happy with the way that they dealt with his dialogue, because I think that sometimes after looking at the comics and how they do it there, I was like, I'm a little nervous that we're not going to be able to understand a single word he says. But it's like, I could mostly make out what he's trying to say, and I appreciate the subtitles. But I liked what they did there, and I also like what they're doing with this guilt and everything he's saying, and us him kind of pulling on our heartstrings a little bit. I think they're handling his character really well.
Because he is, and always has been that super cheerful, super positive character. So it's
sweet
great.
Guy.
Yeah, really sweet. I mean, even the kid they cast, which is funny to think about casting him. How do you cast this? Because you're we're really not gonna ever see your face.
Your voice doesn't sound like your voice. So.
But he is this really sweet, innocent kid when you meet him. He's very he looks just like the character that's underneath the prosthetic. So
and he has great eyes. Yeah, I'm sure they looked at his eyes.
Very solid.
And really nice hair. I like how he has really a nice haircut, which is very different than the comics.
Yeah, he has that big patch on his head.
Yeah, he has he's bald on the top for no real reason, and he's kind of long, scraggly, weird hair. Right. So it's nice that he looks like a nice boy from up here, and then just an asshole in the face.
Well, I guess that's where you go, where you see what looks good in the comic, and then translating it to something you could show on a weekly TV series.
Yeah,
just negotiating that. And I thought they did a great job of translating that look to a television medium.
Did you guys love the raw meat shake that Hugo Root makes him?
Yeah.
Oh man, that was one of the more
Am I allowed to answer no? No, I did not love that. No, that's not coming out of my whiskey blood machine at all at any point in time.
He's want some? It's pretty good. You're like, oh, he's just ugh.
That's the drink for this episode, by the way. It's just a meat shake. Just drink it during the episode.
Is that even something you can do? Is that okay? Let's just pretend you can blend raw meat, an egg, a bunch of paprika and Tabasco sauce, and just drink that, and it's not going to kill you.
You might get sick, but people eat raw meat. Tartare. People eat raw meat all the time. People have raw eggs all the time.
It's true.
And I think he doesn't have that much to worry about at this point. He's like, all right, let's just suck it down.
Yeah.
And it could be just a pre-cooked sausage or something like that. That's already been cooked and just cold, and maybe that's when they.
I think we're really getting into the logistics.
Let's figure this out, guys. Let's spend the rest of the time. One thing I did like about that scene, by the way, is that there's a sense of suspense about who he's about to see.
Totally.
Yeah.
He's walking up the steps, and you're hearing the music kind of change, because I think fans of the book are like, oh my god, you're gonna see Arseface.
Right.
What's he gonna look like? They might not have seen him in advertisements, and everyone else is just like, why is this building up?
Right.
Suspense. And you see this kind of horror show house with this mom just staring at the TV.
Oh yeah.
And this sheriff who's not that great of a guy.
No.
And then when he opens it up, it's they get
No, he was a jerk.
Yeah, Hugo.
full face.
Total jerk.
His humor is great though. Did you guys? I thought that as a character, like that was one of those things where they really captured. There's sort of like this like Quentin Tarantino, Coen Brothers-esque sort of feel that they're going for with the show. I feel like it's that really like sort of like dry, dark humor, very violent, and I thought that his character, they kind of nailed that conversation that he has with Jesse when Jesse's sitting there drinking whiskey in the front seat of his car, and he's just kind of giving his whole spiel. I couldn't help but laugh.
Right.
But unless anybody comes to him specifically, then he's not going to do anything.
That part wasn't as funny, but the previous that was just like a real issue. That's like they're just poking fun at that actually happens in the real world. But
Right. Well, I think it also shows a running theme in this show. I think is going to be the contradicting sense of conservatism.
Yeah, totally.
That feeling of being conservative and feeling like you got to protect something, like protect the sanctity of marriage by not marrying pillows, like he mentioned. But at the same time, when you bring up someone's getting hurt in a marriage, he's like, well, I'm not going to go that far. Not actually acting, but believing in stuff.
It's a good point. Another thing that people were talking in the chat about a lot is they can't seem to decipher yet if somebody's a good guy, if they're a bad guy. If somebody's a vampire, does that make them a bad guy necessarily? Or could our vampires be good guys? Or could our cops be bad guys? What exactly is going on? So I like that they're leaving the audience with those questions.
We're not even very sure where Jesse lies. I think by the end of the show. We'll get to that, but he feels like a little on the dark path, potentially.
I think this is kind of interesting. When I talked to Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, the producers, a couple weeks ago at the same thing, and I asked him about Jesse, and he was sort of Evan was like, in the book, it's really Jesse's story with Cassidy and Tulip kind of as like his lieutenants, and he's like, but in this story that we're telling here, we're really trying to make it about three main characters. So, and I don't know how true or consistent that really will be, but that's at least what he described to me and what the intention is.
Yeah. And you really see that with Tulip.
Yeah, they totally gave her, they gave her a chunk of the episode on her own.
They did, but I felt like we were introduced to Emily as strongly as we were to Tulip almost. Even though we saw Tulip in action more, I feel like I have as strong a sense of who Emily is in this show so far as I do with Tulip.
Right.
So yeah, Emily, that's the girl that runs or helps him out at the church. She's works in the diner.
Is obviously in love with
Jesse.
Yeah.
We have her. We also met what's his name? Ted. Yes.
You guys are really upsetting me tonight. Ted died and nobody cares. Ted passed away. Ted rips his own freaking heart out and you can't even remember his name on air. It's like you guys don't even care about my man Ted.
I care about Ted.
My poor Teddy.
Just opened his heart,
I think that was his name.
How did you guys feel about that moment, his death moment, the tear my own heart out moment? It was like the humor was a payoff when he went to see his mom. It proves the point that Jesse has this voice now that he tells you to do something literally, sort of like the voice of God or something. You have to do it.
And it brings up the stakes. It brings up the stakes of he has this power that could kill people.
Yeah.
So we hear, be brave, tell her the truth, open your heart.
Yeah.
Be brave, tell her the truth, open your heart. And I'm like, oh wow, they're making a clear eyes, full hearts can't lose.
Yeah. Oh no.
And then that's not what happened. Yeah.
By the way,
that's not what it was.
Did you think he was talking about an episode of Friday Night Lights when we first hear his sermon? I thought he was.
Oh,
totally.
Yeah, he was talking about the Dallas Cowboys, but I'm so not a sports guy that I was like, is he just talking about?
He's talking about like Tom Landry, I think, right?
Yeah.
It's like a coach of the Dallas Cowboys from the 70s.
Right.
This was so tough because obviously it was not what Jesse was intending to do. And seeing this on air for the first time, there were so many ways they could have handled these being the words of God and coming out. And this is what they did. And man, that's such a bummer. Open your heart. Like, that's interpretation. Come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Come on. That's not the same as telling somebody literally what to do. Open your heart. That's not what that means, man.
Yeah, and it's also showing it in a way where the audience now knows how severe what he's doing can be.
Right.
But he doesn't necessarily know that. So he still has the chance to misuse the power in the next epised.
Right. And and that's great.
Few episodes.
Yeah, because he has to get a handle on actually what the hell's going on inside him. He doesn't even really know. So we talked about Emily, we talked about Hugo, and we talked about Eugene.
And Ted.
Talked about Ted.
Don't forget Ted, everyone.
Don't forget
Hashtag never forget Ted.
Yeah.
Hashtag Ted's dead, baby.
You get it. No, not minus the baby. That's insensitive to Ted.
Okay.
Just
Sorry.
Ted's dead.
So last sort of subplot, we'll get into this just in a second with Jesse, but Jesse goes to see Donnie's wife at this like meatpacking plant. And he has this conversation. We get some of the S&M reveal and all that. Hashtag Ted's dead. Good call. Good call. We get this like sort of reveal that actually he's not abusing her, or so she says. That in fact that she likes it and it's an S&M thing.
Well, she didn't really say that. She kind of implies it.
Yeah, right. So you don't know if she's just making it up to save face.
Well, I think you get a sense that he's abusive. She's into it because she likes to be abused. This is a problematic
topic.
All right.
But at the same time, they're still ignoring their kid.
Yeah.
Who's witnessing this and is also probably being abused himself.
I get the feeling she's saying it because she doesn't want Jesse to push it farther. That's what I thought. I thought she was making it up.
No.
I think there's a couple different things going on here. I think that it's a combination of what both of you guys just said. I do think there's S&M stuff going on, and I think that she likes that. And I think there's probably more abuse going on. She's probably convinced herself that that's what spills over, and that she has to like that too, and she doesn't know the boundaries between S&M and an actual relationship in which somebody's abusing you.
That's exactly it.
And if that's the case, that's probably when the son is witnessing what's happening. He's probably not walking in on them in bed, or though maybe he is. He's probably witnessing his dad kicking the crap out of the mom, and the mom not knowing how to express that this is different. So I think there's that issue. But then when we do hear Donnie talking to Jesse, and we hear him say that he knows who did this and he'll go kick his ass too, we have to assume that he's also beat up on his son, and that's where it goes completely overboard. So I think that we're supposed to be under the assumption that Donnie's not a good guy right now, not just somebody who likes to play around in bed.
Yeah, it's not just that, they're kinky, so they're fine. Because kink is fine. Everyone kink is fine. And I don't think the show's stepping on the feet of kink people, but they might find that they have a little backlash for that.
Well, so I think the most important thing to notice here, there's two things that really stuck out to me. One, the kid approaches Jesse in the beginning of the episode. That's one of the first scenes we get.
He's from American Summer.
That kid is?
That's where that kid is from.
Yeah, he came into AfterBuzz for that, and I met him. He's a really, really sweet dude, and he was like, I just filmed this pilot. This was months ago. I just filmed this pilot. I'm really excited about it. It's Preacher. I was like, you're way too young to be in that. What? And he was like, no, it was really cool. I was like, okay, little kid. Great. Yeah, he was great.
So his scene with Jesse at the beginning is great. Like it sets the weird tone of like, okay, so this is we'll get into Jesse here because this is really what it pertains to. So the thing about the kid though is that two things. A, he's suggesting that my mom's being beaten up. I don't like it. I don't like what's going on. I need somebody to change it. I heard you were a badass before, so help me. And then two, they actually, and this transitions into the bar scene where Jesse meets Cassidy. And then Jesse kicks the shit out of Donnie and all his buddies. Jesse is old Texas. He is good old boy, fist pump dude, stands up for honor, doesn't like, women or horses being abused. That's what his character is. That's what they're gonna do. He's a cowboy. He wants to ride off into the sunset. So the fact that like he does assert himself when Donnie's like, I'm gonna beat the kid. He's like, no, you're not. I'm gonna destroy you, and he does.
He's like, you have a noise.
Yeah, that's the Jesse Custer we're gonna see in the show. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That is who he's gonna be. So, I asked Dominic Cooper about this, specifically this, because I said, I gotta be honest with you, man. Like, in the episode, I really liked the scene in the bar. I thought it was awesome. I thought that was great. That was the Jesse Custer that I read as a kid in this comic. A lot of the rest of the episode, I was confused, though, because he seems so sort of lackadaisical, and he's kind of hungover the whole time. He doesn't really seem to know who he is. He seems almost like he has no spine. And he was like, I feel the exact same way. He's like, I just watching it for the first time in there, I think the exact same thing. He was like, that was the only scene to me that felt like Jesse Custer. Trust me, in the coming episodes, you're going to be much happier. It does develop in that direction. So I thought that was cool that like he did point that out, because that's the whole thing. The kid and asking Jesse to help and him sort of giving him this like, pray for me thing at the beginning where Jesse's kind of half-assed about it.
Right.
Well, because I think when you read the comic, when you see that first issue, where you already see Jesse at the point where he's already kind of broken. And he's kind of, just retaliating in the bar when he's kind of outing everybody's dirty laundry.
Right.
So you already see him at that point. So this episode, you're kind of seeing what kind of leads up to that moment.
Yep.
So you kind of, I can understand why you kind of feel like I'm not seeing the Jesse Custer that I know yet.
Yeah.
But I feel like you see glimpses of that, and I feel like I can see where Dominic was saying, going forward, you're going to see the Jesse Custer that we know from the series kind of crystallize.
Totally.
I also think that's why it's important that you mentioned before that Tulip and Emily feel like they're on the same level right now. And I think it's to show where Jesse is right now, because he could be a nice preacher and end up with the Emily girl.
Right.
Or he could be the badass that he used to be and maybe secretly is and end up with Tulip. So I think that's why they're at even planes right now, but I think we're going to see something going to happen.
Because we, as you guys said, we ditched the whole convenience thing of everybody just converging in that first episode just by chance. They're putting them all in the town together. I guess it does make sense. You need to see him make that decision for himself.
I really like the choice that they made, just having that one scene really be him kicking butt and the rest of it kind of being this lost character, because I do think that when you're reading something, you know, you get to use your imagination, but when you're watching something, realistically, this is a person who's not whole right now. I mean, we'll figure out all of the reasons why, I'm sure. They can have to do with whatever it is that this storyline is choosing, but he's lost. He's confused. We've seen that. So I think somebody who is lost and confused would not be sure about their ways, would not be kicking butt the whole time, would probably be drinking, would probably be asking a lot of questions, would probably be trying to talk to God who's not talking back to him. Those are all things that I think are realistic to a character. So I like that they made those decisions, even if they're not necessarily what you know as Jesse.
Yeah, there's also a sense of, in pilots as a whole, there's always that question of a character comes into a pilot and comes into a scenario and is questioning, should they stay here? Should I stay? I might go. No, I'm definitely going to stay. That's what every single pilot, every single TV show pilot is about. From Cheers, you have Diane coming in and being like, should I stay in this bar? I don't know if I should stay. I'm going to go. No, I'm going to stay. And with this, it's not really where he is, but it's actually his feeling of, should I fight? Should I stay and fight? I think I might not fight. No, I'm going to fight. Is his whole kind of arc in the pilot.
Yeah, well, that speaks to the whole thing that happens here, how sort of the episode in some ways ends, because he has this bar fight where he kicks Donnie, you know, he beats him up, and he meets Cassidy, and their first interaction is hilarious. It's really good. Definitely super funny, and he's like, I'm trying to understand a damn word you're saying.
What I did like in that fight though is that moment after Jesse throws that first punch and he gets a slow-mo and he smiles.
Yes, that's the fist pump. That was the fist pump of the whole show.
Where he just like this, like he in that moment he's like, this is what I'm good at, this is where I'm comfortable at, I know what I'm doing.
It's also great that earlier we see Cassidy smile right before he's about to fight,
because there is that whole thing that you see all throughout the entire story from beginning to end of Jesse and Cassidy just getting in bar fights. They love to fight. They love to get in bar fights. They love to, you know, they relish it if somebody talks smack to them so they can show them who's boss. That's just like their character. And it's great that they both have the same moment in this episode. That's really awesome.
They're fighters.
I think it's so funny right now. Somebody in the chat, Renji90998, is calling him Jesse Reverend Kilgrave, which is just so
That's very true.
So interesting that that's the other place that we have seen a character who is able to tell people what to do, and they do it.
Who is it? What?
Kilgrave from Jessica Jones.
Okay.
That's the villain. David Tennant plays Kilgrave.
Gotcha.
Who has the power that you tell someone what they do and they have to do it.
Who is an absolute villain.
Yes.
Like, no questions about it. So it's just interesting that we're likening him to Kilgrave because we don't know who Jesse is at this point because of what you mentioned. It seems like he's almost going the darker route. People are probably wondering, is our protagonist actually our antagonist?
Yeah.
Well, one thing with that is like at the beginning when we see the preacher in Africa get possessed there by the word of God, the way that when he talks to his parishioners there, and he has that kind of like the reverb in his voice. How from the way it's depicted in the comic is kind of how I imagine the voice to sound. And when Jesse does it, it doesn't have that yet. So I'm wondering if it's because it's such a great fit for him. I don't know. It's interesting that they didn't make that choice because I always imagine Jesse having some sort of kind of reverb when he does use that.
He needs Cisco for reverb. Thank you. I expected more laughter from you. That wasn't my best one, but
I heard a little like of the pulsing that happened when he talked though, and then he set off some car alarms by talking that way. So I think there was maybe some reverb, and you heard a little bit of the womb pulsing. I think when he started talking. So
womb pulsing.
I'm surprised they didn't turn his eyes red.
Very familiar with the womb pulsing. Yeah, that was surprising. I agree.
I think maybe that will come.
Maybe.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right. Like he'll get more comfortable with it.
Sure. His powers might increase a little bit.
Because that's something I would really actually enjoy seeing.
Yeah.
Well, because
although it's probably expensive.
Again, the whole effect of why his eyes would turn red we'll get to later. But we should touch on Tulip because we've alluded to her a lot, and she's a big part of the episode.
So they also released this scene, which...
This was the first one they released, I think,
right? So we've seen a couple of these scenes. We saw the Africa scene, we saw the opening scene after where he fixes the sign, we saw the Tulip scene. And I was actually... I loved when they released it, and watching it in this, I was kind of bummed that I had already seen it.
Yeah, I made sure not to watch any of that stuff.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart. Because I think this was a cool introduction to her character, although not at all what I thought she would be like. just not at all how I pictured her in my mind.
Well, so they change her pretty significantly. The biggest change is that in the comics, she is a Caucasian blonde woman. Like, so that's the most obvious. That's the only character that they visually just were like, we're going to completely shift how this character looks.
So I think that was a very, very smart move.
Sure.
And I really enjoyed what they did there. It wasn't as much that was the change that confused me. She just seemed like just the most confident.
Yeah. Cocky, feisty.
Right.
I love that because I think that's a big change that needs to happen. Because one of the things, I love the comics, but rereading it, she's someone who becomes very badass and confident, but only through her connection with Jesse. So it's nice to see her not have that connection right away and feel like she's a confident, strong person on her own.
But at the same time, she's seeking him out.
That is true.
So, it's one thing to say something. It's one thing to say to little girls and boys, you have to be stronger, but you have to be strong enough that if the love of your life breaks up with you, that you go hunt him down and murder him.
Right.
Yeah, but in the comics, at least she did seem like someone who needed help. She couldn't really protect herself, or she tried to protect herself a lot. And now it feels like she could at least do it herself. She's strong. She knows her way around a gun.
Well, we're forgetting, though, that early on in the book, you do get that whole thing where when you see them first meet. But just her whole approach to getting Jesse in the first place, which we haven't seen here yet, but I'm sure eventually we'll get a flashback or something. It is very much she goes after what she wants. And
That's true.
And that confidence is what you would need to have to do that. Because he's obviously... He's a Texas guy, like especially with the way they talk about who he used to be. He's kind of a badass. He can fight, a good-looking guy. So for her to be that decisive and really get him, she has to be that kind of confident. Her sense of humor is something that doesn't exist in the comic. They wrote that for the show, which was a good choice, I thought.
And it's also cool that she's handy. Like, she made that weapon out of nothing.
You guys like the bazooka thing?
Yeah.
I thought that was a little silly.
How you make a bazooka.
That was a little silly.
No, I thought that was cute. I thought it was cool. I think it shows that she's been on her own for a bit.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that choice.
So she was able to just make a bazooka out of cans.
Hey, any good woman can.
That surprised me because I thought she was making bombs. I thought it was going to be just a can of moonshine filled with shrapnel she would throw. And then what I saw was a bazooka. It surprised me enough to make me laugh.
Right.
And that sense of humor I liked.
It was sweet that she just kicks that dude's ass. That she tears his ear off. Is that what she does? Yeah, I mean, she just well,
she bites it off. She Mike Tyson's him.
Yeah, I mean that whole scene though was like one of those like that was a great action sequence. That was a feature film level action sequence. I thought. Yeah. The whole thing with like just going through the cornfield, the fighting, and the jumping around, and finally getting him out of the car. That was pretty awesome. I thought the bazooka was a little silly, but I mean I don't have a huge quarrel with it. I thought that their conversation Tulip has with Jesse in the car was sort of interesting. They start talking about the good old days, I'm going to do this thing. He's like, I'm not going to do it. You can't change who you are, all that stuff. So they had this history together before the situation that we're in now. It sounded like they lived a life and they lived dishonestly together or something. Yeah. Did jobs. And they don't do that anymore, but she kind of still does, and he doesn't want to. And I'm trying to figure out what the point of that is going to be, like if we're going to get a lot of flashback at some point.
I like that because I think it showed that he had this outlaw past that he can't go necessarily back to because that's just a step back for the character. Sure. So I think they're going to find a middle ground between whatever his mission ends up being, his mission that he states in the show of being a good reverend and a good person. Right. Well, meets being a badass still, which is the past.
Didn't it say Kansas not too long ago? Yeah. That was the way it described it.
I think it meant like yesterday. Or a couple of days ago, before she showed up.
To that end, maybe she hadn't found him. She says to track him down and eat him alive. So maybe that was to suggest that was on her way to finding him.
We're also forgetting something that they're setting up with her, that she has a map, and we don't know what the map's to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't know what the map's for. I can't even think of something in the book that
to
it
find
connects
him,
to.
Though.
Yeah. Well, I don't think so because when it goes to her at the end, when it has that little montage where he's kind of making his sermon, and you see a little bit of everyone, she's painting her nails on top of the map. So I think the map is important. Like it's gonna go to something. There's a reason.
There's an older dude that's in the apartment when Jesse realizes that she's in the shower. So who is that supposed to be? Her dad?
Her dad.
Yeah, it's her
uncle.
Yeah, I think it's her uncle.
Her
right?
uncle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So that's like new information. That's a thing that they're doing just for the show. We should reference with Jesse a little bit before we keep talking about Tulip. The scene that they cut to 3 different times. Hit the flashback with his dad. Mm-hmm. So he witnesses his dad on his knees get shot through the head by somebody we don't know. And he says the line to him, "You got to be one of the good guys because there's way too many bad ones. And don't cry. We Custers don't cry." So that's directly from the book. It's clipped from a longer line, but it's still directly from the book.
This was perfection. They did this perfectly.
Yeah.
How many times we went to it, the way they shot it, the color scheme of it all, the lines they chose to include.
Yeah.
I thought that they nailed this.
Yeah, agreed.
Exactly what I wanted.
It's one of my favorite moments in the whole story is that line that he gives him, and it is obviously a little longer, but I still thought it was very effective.
Yeah, I also like how something that kind of added for the show, but I like, is the fact that he's a preacher.
Yeah.
He's in the preacher collar in the flashback, and that he's working the same church that his father did.
Because Jesse says, right, I made a promise, I broke it so many times, so I guess that promise is to continue...
To be a good guy.
To continue being a good guy, but
That's
I think
the promise, yeah.
I think we don't hear the promise until later in the episode, and I think we hear it after he says that. I could be wrong with that lineup, but
Right.
I think we assume the promise is to continue being a preacher.
That's
and
what I figured, yeah.
Work in the church, and I think he's taking that literally, and I think he's got to learn that it's not necessarily a literal statement.
Which is eventually what we will find out his mission is, I think, is rooted in that. That's
Right.
the point. That is the ultimate being a good guy. So, yeah, I agreed. So I thought that was all awesome. I guess that brings us through the whole episode up to the final scene in the church after he wakes back up.
There's also you're
Yeah?
right. I was going to mention the people that are following the spirit around.
Oh, sure. That's important. And we don't actually know. I guess we know that because they went to Africa. They show up, and it's the two guys. The one guy eats the tea bag.
Yeah. I also think it's important to note that they're just the most stereotypical outfits.
Yeah.
In every single place that they go to. When they're in Africa, they look like the Great White Hunters.
Yeah.
When they're in Moscow, they have like the hats that you're supposed to have when you go to Russia.
I feel like from the vibe they're giving, you can tell that there's no way this can be good news. Whatever
Right.
it is, whoever they are, there's no way it's good.
So the taller one's the actor's name is Tom Brooke, I believe. He was it's obviously a minor character. The most entertaining interview that I did in the whole premiere was him.
How come?
He's just funny and charming and hilarious. And I'm telling you guys, it's on Popcorn Talk Network. Look it up, Ben Bateman, Tom Brooke. You'll crack up. He's just really funny.
Why do you say obviously a minor character?
I'm just saying in the hierarchy, like you have three leads. He's not a lead, or at least yet. But even just on IMDb, he's like billed like 5th or 6th or something.
He also
But
looks
in all 10 episodes.
he looks just like one of out of the pages a preacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looks like a drawing.
He does. He looks identical.
He has that weird,
it
like,
freaked
pointy-
me out a little bit. It kind of scared me.
Those characters are fantastic, and it's the reason they're fantastic. In fact, if you don't want anything spoiled, then don't actually watch the interview. But if you have read the comic, then watch the interview because I asked him stuff about the comic book. But he's funny and it's great, and I like that storyline, and I think they're gonna be funny. He eats the tea bag. It's like what a weird choice.
Yeah.
Totally like ugh. You guys have ever tried to eat a tea bag before?
No, but it's like the people who eat the core of the apple. You've never seen that? They just the whole thing.
I do that.
Do you really?
Really?
Yeah.
You eat the core of the apple?
Freak.
Yeah, I like chewing
Like
on
the
the
seeds
seeds
and everything. Yeah, no, you're like a bad kind of person then.
Yeah.
I'm just a badass.
No, that's not what I said.
Eating the core, I'm a badass.
You
an
have
apple.
more like an arse face.
Badass. I'm a badass.
Stick with it.
So Jesse delivers this final sermon, sort of. It's not even a sermon; it's an impromptu sermon in the church.
Well, he
there at the
said,
end.
I think he even says
It's not a sermon, right? But it is kind of. Yeah, it is.
It was
It's
completely a
sermon.
sermon. That's what it was. It's like you can't just say something's not something and then do it and it's that. But okay.
Right. So everybody's there. The whole town's there. He pokes fun at the fact that he punched Donnie.
Yeah.
Right. Arseface is now there. You've got Tulip and Cassidy who are both there. Emily's there, and he gives the speech about being a good preacher and about fighting, and he needs to, all that stuff. I don't know. Like, this was the only part of the episode where I was like, I guess I wanted. This didn't leave me feeling like oh, I know what this is going to be next week. This felt a little. It didn't actually feel like exciting enough of an ending to me. This was the one part of the episode that was anticlimactic.
True. I think it would have been nice to have. I liked having a mission statement.
Yeah.
I like that he was able to say how he's going to change as a person, and we're going to see that get played out through the season. I like that. It would have been nice to have some explosion afterwards, or some like fight, something afterwards that's a bit more get your blood going rather than a guy eating a tea bag.
Well, because the thing is, Preacher, the story of Preacher, what's exciting is not Anvil. It's a funny, like, the humor is funny here. They do a really good job with all the characters and all that, but like, if he's trying to fight to be a better preacher in Anvil, then I feel like that's not the show I want to watch, and that's the sense I got.
But I feel like that promise that he makes there, if you don't look at it just for Anvil, but you look at it for what the true objective in the whole series of Preacher, I feel like that's his mission statement for what he's doing that carries him through the whole entire storyline for that.
Yeah, and to talk about being true to the comics, so often we'll end on like the dullest note ever.
Right.
And we'll start, and there will be something huge that happens at first, and then we end on a soft note. That happens all the time.
Yeah, the dull note where they give the name of the issue at the end there.
Yeah, so I think that that's very true to the comics, and I actually really enjoyed that. Like you just said, we kind of are setting ourselves up. This is our mission statement. This is what we're doing, and now watch the rest of our show. Right. So I thought it was smart.
Did you guys think it was at all weird that they... Okay, so I'm not a particularly religious person, but I know lots of people that are very religious, and very rarely do they say to me, I have conversations, I can hear God, I talk to God, God talks back to me. It's never that they don't believe. They could be the most devout, but like the idea that our space is like, I used to hear him and I don't anymore, and Jesse's sort of like, I used to hear him, I don't anymore. I thought that was just sort of a funny thing they introduced that they poke fun at a little bit, is that like, if you can't hear God, God's not there. Which obviously is important to the story, which we'll find out later, but I don't know. Did it just resonate with you guys at all?
I think it resonated as people can say that we could find out that could be literal.
Yeah.
Maybe our space is actually talking to God, maybe. But I also know that's a way to describe faith, and that's a way to say, I hear him because, I hear what I should do.
Sure.
Because you pray, and then you think about what you should do, and if you're able to use your faith to make a decision, that's usually part of it.
So you just hit the nail on the head for me. I think that saying you hear somebody or you hear it is like saying, oh, God, whatever it is, I need a sign. And then the next day, driving by a billboard that's like, just do it, Nike. And you're like, oh, I should do this. That's God. Sorry, that wasn't me making that. That was just me saying, like, that's hearing God.
You think God is Nike. That's
what I'm trying to say is that God is Nike, yes, and Nike is God.
I mean, I'm more Reebok, but that's okay. We all have our different
Adidas
churches.
Is cool too.
Just be careful where you are in your life. The next time you drive by a Just Do It billboard, I mean, God only knows what's going to happen, no pun intended.
Yeah. So I think that saying he doesn't hear him anymore, like he doesn't hear from him. There's no signs or messages. Not like he literally doesn't hear him. Although if it is literal, that'd be interesting that our space at one point could hear God.
Yeah, I just thought it was like an interesting point. With that all in mind, I think we've covered pretty much the whole episode. You guys want to get into predictions?
Prediction.
Sure.
Rest in peace, Ted.
Hashtag Ted.
Now, your AfterBuzz TV prediction.
Now this is where we're gonna get a little spoilery.
So this is what I want to do. We are going to do soft predictions. So this is just, we'll go through one thing based on this episode that we think we might see for next episode, and then we will give a full-on spoiler alert. And anybody who doesn't want to know about comic book stuff can sign off at that point.
So those will be the hardcore predictions. There's soft, and then there's hardcore.
Yeah. So what we're going to do, just because of anybody who is going to sign off. Each of us say your Twitter handle so that people know where to find you. Give us off prediction, and then we'll do spoilers after. All right, I'm going to start over here with you, sir.
You can follow me on Happy Go Jackie, and I feel like we're going to find out a little bit more about the origins of what is in Jesse.
Okay.
Oh, we're doing our predictions now? Soft prediction. I'm Roxy Striar. You can find me at Roxy Striar.
The softest of predictions.
It's not a prediction, but it's what I'm most interested in. I'm really curious what they do with this Emily character because I'm really interested in her right now.
Sure.
I'm interested to see. I'm Dave Child at Mr. Dave Child, Mr. Dave Child.
Softer than that, Dave.
I think. I'm curious to see what happens with this meat packing plant because I'm very interested in the meat packing plant.
Yep, that was the good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Nailed it, Dave.
This is super soft.
Yeah.
And also, who are these teabag guys?
You're being real creepy, man. It's real weird.
When I get soft, I get creepy. That's just what happens.
I am Ben Bateman. You can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter and Instagram. And my prediction for next week's episode is that I believe we saw Cassidy's burning hand in the sun. We've seen him drink blood. It's very clear to us that he is a vampire. I think Jesse finds out next week that Cassidy's a vampire. I think that's going to be a big moment next week. So that is my prediction. With that in mind, guys, spoiler alert. Let's do it.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert!
So if you haven't read the comic and you don't want to know, this is the time to sign off, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Because the show comes back in 2 weeks. There's a break next week, but we are going to talk about just a few details. These will be our spoiler predictions based on all of the information that we know about the comic. And I guess we need to be careful with Roxy because you're 3 books in, right?
I can't wait for the people in the chat that write, you spoiled it for me.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler
What's
alert.
happening? Spoiler.
Yeah, but you don't need to be careful with me. I'll catch up quick.
Yeah, we won't. We'll try to not ruin it for you.
So I'm gonna start. I think the teabag guys are angels, right?
Yeah, that's totally Fior and the other guy. They're the scientists from heaven.
Well, they've already been. Yeah, that's who they're on IMDb. You can check it out who they are.
Oh, it's already there.
Yeah.
Man, come on.
So
What is Fior's friend's name? What the something? I'll find out.
DuPont maybe? Or,
Yeah.
No, it's DeBlanc. That's his name.
DeBlanc, yeah.
They're like the scientists in heaven. Like the way the whole story is described is there's like essentially like the angels and the demons, and then these are the guys that kind of like run the show up there, and they kind of this spirit, which is called Genesis, that was their responsibility to look over.
Yeah.
Because it's a new spirit that is trying to decide what it should be.
Right.
Because it's the spawn of a demon and an angel.
Right.
So that's why I think when we mentioned earlier that it goes for Jesse and it doesn't fit into someone who worships Satan.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit into someone who is devoted to God or Scientology. I think it only fits in someone who doesn't know where their faith is quite yet. It's
conflicted.
questioning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Well, certainly just the way that first storyline goes. I mean, we are just really, we're in a whole new territory, I feel like, because it's so different than what even the first issue kind of sets what happens in Anvil. So I feel like it's interesting to see how they're really going to play out Anvil, really kind of flesh out these characters. And I feel like we may stay here for at least, I think maybe half the season, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. People in the chat earlier were talking about being bummed that there wasn't more sensitivity to light in this episode, which I think is a good point. I think we would get really annoyed if, like, all season long, that's all we heard about.
Yeah, and even in the comics, he does talk about how it's only really direct sunlight. If he can walk around in the shade and he just feels tingly.
Yeah. Well, because when he's all intestined out there and he's lying there, you'd think he'd be like burning up because he's in the direct sun there.
Kind of in the shade. He's in the shade of the actual.
His intestines.
His intestines weren't in the shade.
No, his intestines are causing shade.
Yeah,
the shade is
covered by his intestines.
What if his intestines are the only thing that actually doesn't burn up in the sun?
Maybe
he just has to take his
new show stuff.
Well, given what happens when in the comic when he first gets Genesis in him, and what happens to all the churchgoers.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we don't really get a chance to really know them as really much of a characters, but having spent an episode with them, kind of getting to know Emily and Ted and the rest of the other town, I was actually wondering, like, are they going to just
kill everybody?
Yeah, and do that.
When you see, because that's the thing, you're watching that, but then you see Tulip and Cassidy in the crowd, and you're like, he's not going to explode and kill everybody.
I thought he was going to explode for a second because that's what happens in the comics.
He gets hit by Genesis, and he like emits this explosion that kills the entire town of Annabelle, Texas. That's how the book opens.
I think they're going to do the meat packing, the meat place
the Odin Quinn
storyline
thing. Yeah, it's way later in the book, but they maybe will do it now because Salvation, Texas, which is the small town that happens in, is close. It's a close town to Anvil, so maybe they're going to give us that as kind of the subplot villain of this season. Jackie Earle Haley is playing Odin Quinn Cannon, by the way.
Oh, cool!
And I saw him in the scenes for next week, so we'll meet him next week.
Right. So that's one of the main storylines for this, and I think he's also going to try and figure out what is inside of him.
Yeah, of course.
The story behind Genesis, and I'm wondering if we're going to get a little of Jesse's family.
Yeah, I think we definitely have to, which brings me to my long-term prediction, which is that this season 1, because you guys know it's really sexy to kill a character at the end of season 1 right now. I think that they're going to kill Tulip off in the same way they did in the second book.
But
But then we come back season 2 and she actually is back alive after talking to.
I was thinking about it, and I think because of the meat guy,
right,
coming up and the Genesis question, I don't think the family's going to come in until season 2.
I know for a fact that Until the End of the World is in season 1.
Oh, okay.
Also, two things. Also, when they repacked the book, as you were talking about now, Until the End of the World is in book 1 now. It didn't used to be. It used to be that book 1 ended, then you go to book 2. And I actually was talking to one of the writers, and she told me that she wrote on season 1. And the grandma Until the End of the World stuff was the stuff she wrote on. So
I think it's really important to make people give a shit about Jesse, and I think the easiest way to do that is to talk about his family and where he comes from. So I do think that we definitely will get some grandma stuff. So,
that's true.
Like the thing I was talking about that I want to see the most is him in the frickin' box in the water.
The coffin.
that like stuff like that. I think that's what's going to make us really fall in love with him, and maybe we don't dive all the way into it. We get more into it in season 2 and more into it in season 3 as Tulip's kind of figuring out the story, or maybe even Emily. I don't really know.
Right.
But we need something because we need to love him, and right now we've got people who don't even know if he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we also need to see his journey into becoming that badass. Into becoming the badass who fought in the bar.
And you meet you gotta meet Jody and all that. So I totally agree. I think we're gonna see that stuff. I think you'll get flashback stuff and all the history. I think you'll get that in very much the same way you get it until the end of the world when he's telling his story. I think you'll get the cutbacks just the same way.
This was an interesting thing I noticed in this episode was they kept drinking a whiskey called Ratwater.
Yeah, so that's the town.
That's the town, Ratwater. Well, like on the bottle, was basically a drawing of the Saint of all killers.
That's what I'm saying. So that's the town in the story where it's the town that he's from,
where
he's trying to get back to when his family gets killed and all that.
Right.
Ratwater's the town. So that's a direct.
The Saint of all killers is trying to get back to.
When you find out his Saint of all killers, the term before he's the saint, when his backstory.
Oh, okay, all right. I've read these years ago. I'm rereading them now.
I just reread them all.
And I'm at like the fifth book or something like that.
They throw in that Saint of all killers backstory later now, I think.
Yeah, so it's a little hard for me to be reminded of the. This was like a storyline that I begged, borrowed, and stealed, and then went to libraries to like read all of Preacher way back when. So I'm revisiting now.
Well, what I'm enjoying so far is just the way they tweaked this episode is in where they're going to kind of juggle what they're going to introduce and when. Is that I feel like even with the new backstory elements they added to all these characters, I'm looking forward to seeing how they take what we know in the storyline and then also add and develop stuff that they're just kind of adding in this episode. Yeah, with Tulip, especially Cassidy's backstories as well.
Yeah, Seth and Evan told me that straight up, like if you're a comic book fan, there are a trillion Easter eggs in season 1. You're gonna get like 12 an episode. There's like all over the place. So that's exciting.
I'm wondering who's on the phone with Cassidy.
Yeah, totally. I was wondering that
Seemed
too.
Like it was another Irish guy. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember Cassidy's backstory. At first, I thought it was his friend from New York.
Yeah,
that's what I think it might be.
But he doesn't have. He has this accent.
Maybe they're changing it. Maybe they're changing the storyline. But I think that it could be somebody who ends up he thinks is their friend and he ends up being a villain.
Yeah, Sai would make a lot of sense. He doesn't.
Even if it's not him, like a version of that kind of storyline.
Because Anyway, I think that pretty much should wrap it up. We've gone long enough. We're gonna have so much more to cover, guys. Preacher will be back in 2 weeks. There'll be an encore screening of the same episode next Sunday.
So just listen to this after show again.
Yeah, if you want to.
And keep rating it and sharing it.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks to do the second episode of the show at an earlier time. This is the later screening because Fear the Walking Dead was ending and AMC and all that. So we're gonna do. I think it's 8 o'clock.
Tape at 9 Pacific.
We tape at 9 every week.
Yep.
Yes, we're taping at 9 every week. We'll see you guys at 9 o'clock in 2 weeks, same time, same place. Thanks for hanging out.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.